So I wanted, before we get started, to let everyone know that I have a new podcast out, and it's called Meditations. If you like the Meditations segment of this current podcast, you'll like the Meditations podcast. It's nothing but 20 minutes of meditative sounds. And now, on with the podcast.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate. Just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
I've learned a lot of things in life, Like, here's one I learned. There's a very small window in life to beat the shit out of your dad.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, August the 9th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for anti-radicals, rules for retrogrades, the sovereign child, motivation, meditation, and rules for patriots. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Those who favor a grand plan over experimentation fail to understand the role that failed experiments play in creating progress in society. Failures quickly and efficiently signal what doesn't work, minimizing waste and redirecting scarce resources to what does work. A market economy is an experimental discovery process in which business failures are inevitable, and any attempt to eliminate them only ensures even greater failures. Charles G. Koch. Markets as recurring discovery processes is a concept I want all readers to fully grasp. I can herald the miracles and achievements of markets all day long, but if I ignore how and why markets perform this way, I fail in my aim. We must not shy away from the comprehensive story of markets, that in their role as a discovery process, they uncover successes and failures. Effective market mechanisms purge those failures, and we are all better for it.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the prologue for the book Rules for Anti-Radicals by Paul Vallone. In the 50 years since Saul Alinsky wrote Rules for Radicals, it has served as a guidebook for the aspiring revolutionaries bent on taking over our media, our cultural institutions, and our schools. Judging from our present situation, they have largely succeeded. Ironically, leftists routinely deny Alinsky, claiming conservatives are overly fixated on him. What radical youngsters fail to understand, however, is that social justice tactics taught by the Midwest Academy and others almost invariably derive from Alinsky's. As one who advocated working within the system, Alinsky himself might be shocked at radical anarchists like those of Antifa. What we are witnessing is nothing less than a nascent revolution aimed at ending the values and morals that produced the United States and replacing them with socialist autocracy. In Rules for Radicals, one can see the origins of what is happening today. Yet, by current standards, Alinsky's ideas seem almost quaint. Those bent on burning down America's cities are uniformed in black bloc riot helmets and gas masks. Far from representing spontaneous protest, their destruction is centrally planned and funded. Trying to stay out of the line of fire, corporations like Walmart, Target, and Home Depot now donate to their revolution. If Alinsky's claims are to be believed, he might not think much of today's radicals. He correctly said, "Dogma is the enemy of human freedom." Yet dogma is exactly what drives cancel culture. The system Alinsky claimed to work within is the same system a Black Lives Matter leader threatened to burn down. It is plausible that Alinsky might not have anticipated the Frankenstein's monster he created. In my 28 years of political organizing, I've taught that political action divides into 4 categories: economic, political, legal, and a broad category I call non-legislative. To that last category, today's radicals have reintroduced violence. I won't be advocating that. Instead, my goal is to give you the tools and tactics to make violence unnecessary. Let's hope that it is still possible. What follows are not just tactics for conservative political activists running organizations, but also practical advice for dealing with leftists you will inevitably endure in your daily routines. The neighbor who calls your American flag offensive, the school board more interested in ideology than educating children, the corporate employer who demands you accept the LGBTA agenda. Winning the battle for our culture and our nation will require you to develop a new mindset, a mindset determined to stop leftists from cowing you into submission. The thing to remember about Saul Alinsky is that, as reprehensible as you may find someone who revered Lucifer as the world's first political activist, he was not wrong about what wins political debate. The difficulty lies in adapting his tactics to preserve our culture without succumbing to their inherently corrupting nature. To steal from Hamlet's soliloquy, there's the rub. And that was the prologue to the book Rules for Anti-Radicals. And I like this book in part because, as he said here in the prologue, part of what he's going to be doing is giving individuals rules. Most of the books, the rules books that I play on Saturday are books that are geared, number one, to politicians, and number two, to groups of people instead of to the individual. And when I've listened to them or read them, I've always thought, well, what about me? What about when I go to work and I go into the break room and I am cornered by Sammy Socialist? What do I do? How do these rules apply to me? And so that's what I'm trying to do with my podcast. And obviously that's what this guy is trying to do with his book. So back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 5. Risus bellum est. Laughter is war. The only possible response by a sane man to an insane claim is laughter and ridicule. Never buy radical premises. In the course of political badinage, do not settle for reason where action is due, and vice versa. This logic extends with a special force to the needfulness of the scornful guffaw. Laugh openly at your radical opponent's insane, constant recusals of the Christian West. With good reason, the expression, "I will not dignify that claim with a response," bears profound value against radicals, especially in the clownish cultural and political scene today. The act of laughing makes for a devastating weapon of cultural war because there is simply no dignified reply to it. If a man responds line item to a radical's insane proposition in a way which suggests that it deserves more dignity than it actually merits, moderate and incautious listeners nearby may be persuaded in the wrong direction. If they are not persuaded all the way in the wrong direction, they will at the very least lose interest in the prolix dialogue between you and the radical, assuming as they walk away that the truth is probably something of a median between the two positions they heard. On the other hand, if they had heard you simply laugh at the idiotic blasphemy leveled by the radical, your punchy laughter would have well served both their curiosity and their short attention span. In other words, one need not outsmart oneself by avoiding the intuitive schoolyard approach of ridicule. Trust your gut, especially when it tells you to laugh at radical claims. Retrogrades who fail to respond with laughter will end up, in good faith, buying dangerous premises that would have more easily been rejected by simple ridicule in the first place. Not only does this needlessly lengthen what should be quick, pithy conversations with radicals, but more importantly, it lends false credibility to incredible and neurotoxic ideas, even in the shrewd mind of the retrograde. The conventional wisdom by old guard types within the ranks of humble Christianity or center-right politics would be either to listen compassionately without reply or to reason it out slowly in dialogue. Both of these replies are gravely mistaken, which costs their users efficacy and street cred. The latter is earned by satisfying the gut instincts. For example, the proposition that men have penises is now supposed to be controversial. Radical haters of the Christian so-called patriarchy have seen to it that the most fundamental Christian teachings on human sexuality and pretty much everything else are now received as dubious and hateful. This represents abject madness. Listening compassionately to a confused person of this persuasion is never a bad idea in the one-on-one context. But a retrograde, as we have said above, is exceedingly unlikely to find himself in private dialogues with transsexuals. Dialogue will usually be of the public sort. Accordingly, some form of winsome public reply will be needed. Don't borrow trouble. Take shortcuts where they present themselves. The derisive laugh will not be available for all the vast array of radical claims, many of which will have to be forensically dispelled. But where laughter is sufficient, use it. Any thoughtful or even unthoughtful reply aside from scornful laughter, tendered to a radical who attempts to rebut the obvious fact that only men have penises, will automatically ennoble the inane notion that natural sexuality can be altered. Replying with diligently collected biological data, of course, might winsomely convince an interlocutor who honestly didn't already know this basic fact of human life. But since there are virtually zero honest disbelievers in the fact of two biological sexes, your data and the time you spent to acquire it will have been misspent on fools. Retrogrades' time efficiency and individual reputations will improve sharply upon the habituation of the well-timed, well-placed guffaw of unmuted derision.
And that was Rule 5 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the last part of Chapter 10 from the book, The Sovereign Child, and it's called Conclusion, Freedom Isn't Optional for Progress. The mistaken theory that knowledge is justified and that children are receptacles for knowledge to be poured into leads to mistaken ideas of control. The conventional view is that we can and should control what children think by carefully removing wrong, unjustified ideas from their consumption. According to this view, if we allow in only what is proven to be true, then children will be set on the right path. This sets the stage for restricting screens, near constant surveillance, compulsory schooling, and general limitations on autonomy. In short, control the child by controlling what goes into the bucket that is their mind. This control can't work because minds are not buckets and kids will reach unpredictable conclusions even if their inputs are controlled. Attempts to control often backfire in precisely the opposite direction. Some kids take particularly interest in the ideas that are restricted simply because they are restricted. When efforts at control do work, it is because some kids will come to understand the reasons for those controls, even if the methods to impart those reasons are misguided. Unfortunately, some kids will only go through the motions, showing the expected behavior, but for reasons of fear or shame, rather than that they internalize the right knowledge. Just as you've experienced thoughts popping up in your mind, unbidden and seemingly from nowhere, kids also undergo the same process. Like us, what their most compelling thoughts will be. Like us, they can't know ahead of time what their most compelling thoughts will be. They can only deal with thoughts after they appear in light of all the alternative thoughts they might explore. If kids can't even know ahead of time what kind of thoughts will pop into their minds and which they'll choose to explore, how could parents possibly know such a thing? Simple, because parents have been children before. Back to the book. The truth is that they can't, and so there's no way of controlling what guesses children's minds might make and passionately pursue. Wrong. Back to the book. The central message of this book is that controlling knowledge growth in people is not possible. Again, wrong. Including children. In fact, we should pursue the opposite, freedom. Freedom doesn't mean neglect. It still involves safety, health, and order, but these are achieved while preserving kids' autonomy, not at the expense of autonomy. And I'm going to interject. He spends a lot of time in this book talking about freedom, and he says, it's not neglect, but he fails to show where the limits are. Okay, limits is what means no neglect. And freedom, just letting them go, is neglect. He shows no instances. He doesn't provide any reasons or methods for providing structure for kids. But yet he says, it's not neglect. Back to the book. This isn't easy, and there are no simple rules for achieving this because this requires unpredictable creativity, knowledge growth, and discovery by the parent. But it is a more productive target for parents' efforts than working to control. Maximizing control, maximizing freedom both take work, but the latter is more fun and less work in the long run because a sovereign child can take care of themselves sooner. Childhood is a period of supported knowledge growth until a person is capable of solving life's problems on their own. Knowledge grows by guessing and testing, trial and error, elimination, conjecture, and criticism. Not true. Back to the book. The necessary condition is freedom, where guesses and criticisms are encouraged and given a chance to work, and mistakes are never punished or shamed. Isn't that interesting? Huh. But anyway, so that's the end of chapter 10. Again, on Fridays, we hear from Dr. Sachs, who explains the consequences for this kind of parenting. We have kids that are malnourished, kids that are overweight, obese, sometimes on the verge of being diabetic, and in some cases being actual diabetics, because these liberal parents say to their kids, eat what you want, eat when you want, eat as much as you want. So, back in a minute. Thank you, and now a little bit of motivation.
When you have a dream, that dream will always be tested. Life is going to see how bad you really want it. It's going to throw so many problems in your path. You're going to lose friends. You're going to lose loved ones. You're going to face disappointment constantly. You're going to feel lost and won't know what to do or where to go.
This is where you discover what you are really made of. Are you going to crumble under the weight, or are you going to rise stronger and more determined than ever? It's in these moments of uncertainty and pain that your true character is forged.
If you really want it, like you say you want it, you will find a way. You'll stop at nothing to reach it, because that's what winners do. They don't sit around and feel sorry for themselves. They get their ass up and move forward. They don't allow the pain to stop them. They use it as fuel to go harder. Winners understand that the path to getting to their dreams is not supposed to be easy. Every challenge, every setback is an opportunity to learn, grow, and become even more unstoppable.
And that's exactly why those roadblocks and issues are there in the first place. They're there to push whatever that dream is that's on the inside of you out.
So you don't stop when you're tired, you stop when you're done, when you've executed. Those days, you don't want to get up and get to work. You got to think about the people you're doing this for. When that alarm goes off and the last thing you want to do is get up, you remind yourself, I'm doing this for my wife. I'm doing this for my husband. I'm doing this for my kids, for my family, and for myself, for my own well-being, for making myself a better person, to become more, to do more, to have more.
And when you can think about those things, you can go one more mile. You can go one more hour. You can go one more day at work. You can push yourself to do more than you thought you could.
Because your skill will only take you so far. Your average instincts will only get you to a certain point. But when you have mental toughness, when you become gritty, when you build your willpower, when you develop that ability to go through really hard when you really don't want to do it, when everything sucks, when it's miserable, but you can force your mind and body to get the job sucks. When it's miserable, but you can force your mind and body to get the job done. That's when you will reach greatness and make it happen.
In life, we all hit points where we've got to choose between giving up or going all in. It's at these moments we got to remember, we're not defined by how many times we've been knocked down, but by how many times we stand the fuck up. This whole thing is about realizing you got this wild potential inside you, and all the tough stuff you got to do is just the key to letting it loose. Picture yourself staring at a huge mountain. It represents every single doubt, fear, and challenge you've ever faced. But inside you, there's this fire, this unstoppable force saying, I got this. This will not stop me.
Think about it. Every monumental thing that's ever been done was once thought impossible. The world's full of stories of people who said, "F it," and went for their dreams, who stared down the storm and came out on top. You're no different. You got endless potential and strength like no one's business. And when you dream your dream, I want you to know there are thousands of other people who want exactly the same dream. You're not the only one who wants to be number one. You're not the only one who wants to go to the NBA. So what do you have to do? You got to outwork, outgrind, and outperform every last one of them. You got to eat it. You got to breathe it. You got to sleep it. Every single thing you do in your life has to pour into that dream. You dedicate yourself to that thing you want, and you block out everything else. You don't allow yourself to get pulled off course. If it doesn't support the direction you want to head, you tell it no. You have to make these sacrifices. You have to give up stuff in order to go up. Every single person you look up to, they had the strength to go through all the crap and mud in life to get to the highest peaks. Because they were willing to push through all the judgment of others and the pain of failing over and over and the tears when everything was going wrong.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. And now, meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you now, psychopathy.
Hey, Psych2Goers. When you hear the terms psychopath and sociopath, what comes to mind? Some people might think of people who commit violent acts with no remorse. While this can be true in some cases, this does not reflect everyone with the conditions. So with that said, here are 5 ways to tell sociopaths and psychopaths apart and how they're diagnosed. Let's start with how a psychopath or sociopath is diagnosed. While psychologists agree that sociopaths and psychopaths are different from one another, they are actually given the same diagnosis, as both exist under the term antisocial personality disorder. ASPD is a condition characterized as a lack of empathy and disregard towards laws and rules. It's also important to know that antisocial refers to harmful behaviors towards other people. It's not the same as asocial, which is classified by introversion. Generally, people with ASPD will exhibit disregard for the feelings of others, disregard to the laws and rules, no remorse after hurting others, aggression, and dangerous behaviors. The difference lies in how these symptoms are portrayed. Some psychologists argue that psychopathy is a more severe form of ASPD, while others think that it is something completely different. Sociopaths don't care about others, while psychopaths pretend to. Sociopaths tend to make it clear that they don't care about the needs of others. Because of this, they may have extremely unstable and abusive relationships. Psychopaths, on the other hand, can be much more difficult to spot. They tend to blend in well with the people around them and can fake their emotions to avoid drawing attention. Because of this, psychopaths may appear completely normal, sometimes so much so that they have long-lasting relationships and families unaware of their condition. Sociopaths are impulsive, while psychopaths tend to be methodical. Generally, sociopaths may have a difficult time controlling their emotions and lash out in explosive outbursts in a short period of time. They may carry out violent acts and crimes quickly and in the heat of the moment. Psychopaths, on the other hand, tend to be much more calculated and thoughtful in their approach. They may come up with elaborate plans to commit horrible acts and do so without drawing too much attention. Sociopaths are generally a product of their environment, while psychopaths are born that way. Nature versus nurture is used to describe whether a person's behavior is a product of genetics or how they were raised. Typically, it is believed that sociopaths develop as a result of trauma and neglect throughout childhood. Psychopaths, on the other hand, are believed to develop as a result of genetics and less so from how they grow up. Simply put, sociopathy is believed to be learned and psychopathy is inherited. Sociopaths can feel empathy in certain situations, while psychopaths cannot. Some psychologists believe that sociopaths can feel empathy towards others in certain situations due to the learned nature of their condition. However, this can be inconsistent and may only be present in specific, isolated instances. Some would argue that sociopaths have a sense of right and wrong, just a weak one. Psychopaths, on the other hand, may not be able to feel empathy in any context and usually have no concept of right and wrong. Sociopaths tend to be unstable, while psychopaths are stable. It can be easier to spot someone who is a sociopath due to the impulsive and aggressive nature that they tend to display. Their behavior may be bold and show itself in their chaotic relationships. As psychopaths are more methodical and calculated, they show fewer signs of abnormality. They can also be extremely manipulative and charming, which fools people into thinking that everything is ordinary. While sociopaths tend to live on the fringe and avoid education, psychopaths may become highly successful in their fields. While psychopaths can develop mood disorders like depression, they tend to have a high level of control over their emotions. So, did this video shed some light on the differences between sociopaths and psychopaths? Psychopaths and sociopaths are similar, but are not the same, with many contrasting personality traits. It is important to know that anyone with any kind of ASPD is capable of receiving treatment, and receiving the proper help can make a difference. Let us know what you thought on this topic in the comments.
And that was psychopathy. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a last, let's go ahead and do the last two paragraphs of an article in the American Thinker called Weaponizing Victimhood, and it's about Israel and Hamas. A great irony in the victimhood narrative is that by all objective standards, Israel is the real victim. Lacking any provocation, Hamas killed 1,200 innocent Israelis, including infants, kidnapped 251 hostages, raped women, and has repeatedly rejected ceasefires. Alas, in today's world, subjective weighing of evidence does not dictate how the victim label is bestowed. Judged by who currently owns the victim label, it seems that a genuine victim must be weak, belonging to an oppressed group, feels especially aggrieved, and be driven by intense hatreds. According to these rules, a rich white male CEO thus cannot be a victim, even if shot in cold blood. Successful people like the Israelis are thus disqualified from victimhood. Hamas's victimhood narrative is not intended to defeat the Israeli military. Rather, like the colonial wars of liberation that once defeated the military stronger European powers, Hamas can win simply by surviving until an exhausted Israeli public forced the government to exit a hopeless quagmire. This strategy thus resembles the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam. We left rather than fight a futile war. The mighty IDF, conqueror of countless Arab nations, is now being defeated by creating a nation of victims. Dead Arab but not dead Jewish children are now potent military weapons. And so the problem with this for this author is this is a very badly written article because he has no insight. It's as I've described about this so-called, it's not, first of all, it's not a war. That's a similarity between what's going on here and what's going on in what went on in Vietnam. For whatever reason, we decided not to declare war on Vietnam. So the same thing with Israel is they can't they can't do it because Hamas is not a country. Israel cannot declare war on Hamas. I mean, I suppose they could, and I think they should go ahead and declare war on Hamas anyways, for reasons I'll explain in a minute. But the point is, that's where the similarities. There's no wars here. These are combat operations in Vietnam and in Gaza. And so because of that, you cannot censor the media. And the media then is free to act, if it so chooses, and apparently so chooses here, to act as a propaganda arm of one side or another. In Vietnam, they acted as the propaganda arm of the North Vietnamese and the communists, and here they're acting as propaganda arm of Hamas. That's where we get into all this victimhood stuff. And it's as I said in the beginning, as long as Israel is fighting the news media, they can't win because there's nothing they can do. There's no way for them to shut it off. If they declare war on Hamas, then they ostensibly have they can censor the media in furtherance of the war effort, and then they've got a shot. So as long as Israel refuses to declare war, they're going to find themselves defeated by not Hamas, who's militarily and all other ways inferior, but find themselves defeated by AP, UPI, Reuters, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, CNN, ABS, NBS, CBS, etc. Their battle, and they still haven't figured this out, their war is not with Hamas. It's with the news media. The news media are the ones that are deciding who are victims, and as it pointed out in the article, why they're victims. People that live in Israel can't be victims because they're Israeli. So they're not victims. Only people in Gaza can be victims. But you can squash that whole idea again by fighting not the Palestinians in Gaza as much as fighting and winning the battle against the news media. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for Patriots.
Chapter 11. Commandment number 10. Play offense. The great Yogi Berra said it best. Half of this game is 90% mental. The inconvenient truth is we conservatives are so used to being marginalized that we're often mentally pistol-whipped before the battle even begins. We are so desperate for cultural acceptance that we'll latch on to even the slightest homage to conservatism from a famous figure, no matter how flawed. In football, it's known as a helmet game. When one team has such a mental stronghold on its rival that the minute things don't go as planned on the field, they start collectively thinking to themselves, here we go again, anticipating the worst. When a team has reached that mental breaking point against its rival, it's time for a culture change. And that starts by hiring leaders or coaches who will challenge the status quo and get the players to believe in themselves again. I think American conservatism is in the exact place my favorite college football team was in back in 1969, when a young coach named Bo Schembechler arrived on the scene from Miami of Ohio. Michigan was built on a winning tradition, just like conservatism, but had fallen behind because the nice guy coach was getting run over by the Buckeye bully, Woody Hayes. The final game Michigan played before Schembechler arrived was against Ohio State for the Big Ten Championship in 1968, and the Wolverines lost 50-14. That's right. Despite the fact both teams were ranked in the top 5, the final score was a lopsided 50-14. In order to score 50 points, Ohio State put its starters back in the game for a 2-point conversion late in the fourth quarter. When asked afterwards why he went for 2 points to run up the score on his rival, the brash Ohio State coach said unapologetically, "Because I couldn't go for 3. Enter Bo Schembechler. Schembechler had been a Woody Hayes disciple, playing for Hayes and then serving as one of his top assistant coaches at Ohio State. Despite a successful tenure at Miami of Ohio, local media in Detroit asked the question, "Bo who?" when he was hired. The University of Michigan was the Haight-Ashbury of the Midwest in 1969, so it was a bit of a culture shock to see this conservative bull in a china shop with a crew cut arrive on campus. The first thing Schembechler did was purge his program of the soft-headed and uncommitted. That first spring practice was so tough that several players quit. Future NFL Hall of Famer Dan Deerdorf was on that team, and he told the media, "The track team runs less than us, and their coach is nicer." Schembechler was looking for players willing to do what it took to be great, not just pretty good. At a program that had been as successful as Michigan's, it's very easy for complacency to set in. Woody Hayes may have had a few faults, but complacency wasn't one of them. He was frankly hungrier than that school up north that he hated. Meanwhile, Michigan was content to rest on past laurels until Schembechler arrived. Come fall, Schembechler's first season initially got off to a bit of a rocky start, with a blowout loss at home to Missouri and a road loss to Michigan State. By the time the Wolverines hosted undefeated and top-ranked Ohio State, however, in the season finale in late November, they had gelled as a team and could clinch a Big Ten championship with an upset over the Buckeyes, who were 3-touchdown favorites. The talk all season after each Buckeye blowout is where that squad stood in the annals of college football. Analysts at the time said the only team that could beat Ohio State was the NFL's Minnesota Vikings and their famous Purple People Eaters. No one gave this ragtag bunch of Wolverines much of a chance. And why should they? They had lost by 36 points to these exact same Buckeyes 1 year ago. But by the end of that afternoon, Michigan pulled off what the pundits called the upset of the decade, beating Ohio State 24-12. Years later, when a now retired Woody Hayes reminisced at a banquet about the best team he ever had, the Hall of Fame coach said it was that 1969 team that was upset by Michigan. That win set the stage for a dominant era of Michigan football. 16 of the 21 teams Schembechler coached finished in the top 10 of the final rankings, and he won 13 Big Ten championships. Several coaches under his tutelage went on to have magnificent careers. Hall of Famers like Lloyd Carr and Don Nehlen, national champion coaches like Bill McCartney and Les Miles. Schembechler changed a complacent culture and rebuilt it on the pillars of integrity, accountability, and excellence. His leadership helped create other equally successful leaders who put their own spin on Schembechler's vision. I tell you all of this for 2 reasons. One, I might be the world's biggest Michigan fan and look for any opportunity to represent for the maize and blue, but you could care less about that. 2, because of all of this talk for our need to find another Ronald Reagan, I think what we really need are some Schembechlers. There is a fine line between tradition and nostalgia. Tradition is the assurance that you have the right ethics and institutions to be successful again based on what was done in the past, provided you have the right people in place to exploit them. Tradition spurs action and innovation to build upon a foundation of success. On the other hand, nostalgia is a paralyzing force because it tempts you to keep trying to recreate the precise conditions that led to a specific past success. Often, that specific success was a moment in time, and the attempt to repeat it creates a myopic inflation of that success to the point it stalls progress towards a new era of success. Instead of moving forward, you keep trying to go back to the good old days. Right now, we are mired in nostalgia at the expense of our tradition. We are mired in nostalgia because our entire movement has been defined by one man's success, as opposed to the timeless traditions he fought for. As a result, every sort of Republican now claims Ronald Reagan as their legacy, even the absolute worst ones that might as well be Democrats. A pretty good rule of thumb is that if everybody can claim something, then nobody can. Yes, Reagan was a gifted man, and I've used several examples of that giftedness in this book, but that giftedness doesn't matter to us if it's not used to advance the principles we hold dear. There have been gifted people throughout history that used their gifts to do wicked and awful things. Why don't we celebrate them? Because what they stood for was wrong or evil. That's why. In other words, what they stood for overshadowed their giftedness. The same should be true of Reagan's positive legacy as well. While it's a testimony to his legacy that we still play clips of Reagan to defend our values today, it's also an indictment of how stale we are. At the time I was writing this book, I just turned 40 years old. When Reagan first ran for president in 1976, I was still eating paste in my boogers. When Reagan left the White House in 1989, I was in the 10th grade. The emerging generation of conservatives/libertarians behind me, they don't remember him at all. Al Gore had yet to invent the internet. Cell phones were a handheld monstrosity for the rich. There was no direct TV. We hadn't even invented those really cool frozen yogurt places where you buy in bulk depending on the amount of toppings you have. Heck, MTV was still playing music videos back then. You know how ancient the Macarena seems now? Well, when Reagan left office, the Macarena was still 8 years away from splitting our eardrums. And we still didn't know who let the dogs out either. The distance between 1989 and now is made even longer by how quickly information is transmitted with all our technology nowadays. When Reagan left office, we were just beginning the era of the 24-hour news cycle. Now we have the 24-minute news cycle if you take out the commercials, and 140 characters or less on Twitter. Quoting Reagan to the emerging generation today is like quoting Calvin Coolidge, another great conservative, mind you, but they don't remember him either. It's time to move forward. Now notice I didn't say move on, but move forward. Moving on either means forgetting the past or casting it aside. Moving forward means honoring it and then building on it. We don't need to return to the Reagan era any more than the Democrats need to return to the era of FDR. What we need to do is take the success Reagan had and build on it while at the same time learning from his failures. That's how you move forward. And yes, Reagan had failures. He wasn't a perfect angel that tiptoed through the raindrops without getting wet. That's nostalgia talking. Back to my beloved Michigan Wolverines for a second. After a phenomenal 40-year run, the university administration decided to move on from the Schembechler era rather than move forward. So they brought in Rich Rodriguez as head coach in 2008, and in the span of just 3 years, his tenure nearly dismantled 5 decades worth of a foundation that had been built. Rodriguez lost as many Big Ten games in his 3 seasons in Ann Arbor as Michigan had lost the previous 12 seasons combined. Rodriguez was eventually replaced by Brady Hoke, who was a part of the Schembechler era. Hoke returned Michigan to its Schembechler era pillars, but moved forward at the same time. He's not running the same offense and defense Schembechler was running in 1969. He's not prickly with the media the way Schembechler was early in his career, but instead realizes the necessity of being professional and available with the media, telling your story to future recruits. He runs a contemporary program built on the foundations of a timeless tradition. In his first season in 2011, he went 11-2, ended a 7-year losing streak to Ohio State, and notched Michigan's first major bowl victory in 12 years. Now that's what I call moving forward. The debate isn't about who is the next Reagan. The debate is about whether to move on or move forward from the Reagan era. Right now, the Republican Party on a national level is run by those who would rather move on. Sure, they use Reagan in their branding and fundraising, but they're far removed from the bold colors that he stood for. Their uniform is pale pastels. What I suggest we do is move forward. Reagan won two big arguments with the left: low taxes that spur economic growth, and peace through strength, focusing on the collapse of the Soviet Union via the arms race. Even Democrat presidents nowadays, when they're in trouble, offer targeted tax cuts and tax rebates as a means to spur economic development. So the debate is no longer about whether or not to cut taxes, but for whom and by how much. In addition, the era of the dovish Democrat president is over. President Clinton set a record for the most military deployments. President Obama may have talked a good George Soros game when running for president in 2008, but his foreign policy is virtually indistinguishable from his Republican predecessor, for better or for worse. And he's very proud to be the commander-in-chief that got Osama bin Laden. That's a far cry from the Democrats in the 1980s, feting communist Sandinista leader Daniel Ortega at Beltway cocktail parties. However, Reagan failed to substantially reduce the size of government, did nothing substantive to dismantle the left's monopoly on education, lent his name to a failed amnesty program that turned California from red to blue in elections for the last 2 decades, and appointed 2 mediocre to terrible Supreme Court justices. We don't need to keep having arguments we've already won. We need to start winning arguments we haven't yet had. It's time to stop pining away for the salad days and move forward and build on Reagan's legacy, not settle for it. The Reagan era was supposed to be the vanguard of a conservative renaissance, and instead it's become the high watermark. Kobe Bryant and LeBron James were instantly compared to Michael Jordan coming into the NBA. Both of them initially did little to temper those comparisons, and early on they each languished under the sheer weight of them. It wasn't until they became their own men. James had to move to another team to make that happen, and they developed their own games that both became repeat champions. If we truly want to honor Reagan's legacy, we must stop drowning in nostalgia awaiting his heir apparent, and instead rally around the principles he fought for. While we keep trying to turn the clock back, the left keeps moving forward. It's time for a new generation of leadership that combines a respect for tradition with a hatred for losing. And that means losing in the public policy arena and not just on election day. A new generation eager to prove themselves, like Schembechler was when he arrived at Michigan in 1969, willing to get rid of the dead weight and not accept good is good enough when only greatness will do. It is time for leaders that aren't here to make friends with the system, but have a cause they believe is worth fighting and dying for if necessary. Leaders who don't create followers that become groupies or hangers-on or lifelong political hacks, but instead inspire others to become disciples and leaders themselves and move on and take the fight elsewhere when they're ready to do so. We've got too many people that are comfortable with losing not as bad and calling that a win. We need leaders from the Ricky Bobby motivational school who understand second place is the first loser. And in our case, winning isn't simply winning an election, but winning the future for our children and grandchildren. We need a house cleaning and a culture change. We need to hit the Control-Alt-Delete buttons and reboot. You do that when your computer itself is still in good shape, but is locked up and not working the way it should. Similarly, our principles are still good, but the process of implementing them and advancing them has lockjaw. We have already discussed in this book how too often we accept the left's premise and allow them to have the moral high ground. So too often we end up being defined by what we're against, not what we're for. We also have failed to define what it is we're actually conserving as conservatives, which is an inherent weakness of our movement that 19th century theologian R.L. Dabney presciently observed. He said, quote, "Conservatism's history has been that it demurs to each aggression of the Progressive Party and aims to save its credit by a respectable amount of growling, but it always acquiesces at last to the innovation. What was the resisted novelty of yesterday is today one of the accepted principles of conservatism. It is now conservative only in affecting to resist the next innovation, which will tomorrow be forced upon its timidity and will be succeeded by some third revolution, to be denounced and then adopted in its turn. American conservatism is merely the shadow that follows radicalism as it moves forward through perdition. It remains behind it, but never retards it, and always advances near its leader." Every time I read that quote, it never fails to hit too close to home. As a Christian, I am commanded in the Bible to always have a ready defense for my faith, but Nowhere am I commanded to remain perpetually on the defensive. The gospel itself is an offensive action, the result of a sovereign God who does not sit passively by, like a kid with an anthill, as his creation goes to pot, but instead actively engages his creation to the point of coming to earth himself to reach out to us flesh to flesh. The American Revolution was also an offensive action, with patriots taking action to preserve their God-given rights. I don't want to conserve the left's agenda by growing government less than they would, killing fewer children than they would, and destroying marriage incrementally through civil unions instead of outright handing over the institution of marriage like they would. I want to defeat the left, not conserve it. When it's time for my generation to leave the world stage, I want us to be known as the generation that did to America's leftist progressives what Reagan did to the Soviet Union. To make that happen, we need to play offense. Offense is essential because you have to be on offense to score points, and you have to score points to win. Playing offense also boosts your side's morale while doing psychological damage to the other side. Go back to the beginning of this chapter when I talked about how mentally beaten down we are. That's purely the result of the perception the left is always on the offensive and we're always on the defensive. That's why there's so much talk about returning to the Reagan era today, because other than the early days following the 1994 Republican takeover of Congress, that really was the only time any of us can remember our side on the offensive. I think that's also one of the reasons the late Andrew Breitbart made such an impact on the conservative movement despite passing away at only 43 years old, which is an age when most men are just starting to come into their own. Breitbart played offense and went after the left, and was equipping others to do the same. The left's confidence has morphed into hubris because they're used to playing offense, and we've conditioned them to anticipate our surrender any minute now. That's why we need our people to play offense, because it really does throw them into a hissy fit when we do. A good example of this was something Kentucky Senator Rand Paul did during the summer of 2012. Yes, that Rand Paul, the one who stepped in it earlier in this book, but this time he stepped on it, or rather, them. To do Rand justice, let's quote directly from the story the liberal Huffington Post did on the example I'm citing. Quote, Senator Rand Paul moved this week to hold a non-controversial flood insurance bill hostage until the Senate agrees that life begins at fertilization. The bill, which would financially boost the national flood insurance program on the cusp of hurricane season, had been expected to pass easily in the Senate. But since Paul on Monday offered an unrelated fetal personhood amendment, which would give legal protections to fetuses from the moment of fertilization, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is threatening to halt progress on the legislation. I'm told last night that one of our Republican senators wants to offer an amendment, listen to this one, wants to offer an amendment on when life begins, Reid said on the Senate floor Tuesday. I'm not going to put up with that on flood insurance. I can be condemned by outside sources. My friends can say, let him have a vote on it. There will not be a vote on that on flood insurance. We'll either do flood insurance with the amendments that deal with flood insurance, or we won't do it. We'll have an extension. Reid has previously allowed Republicans to attach unrelated amendments to other important bills in the past few months, but Reid called Paul's measure ridiculous and outlandish and asked Republicans to deal with him on their side of the aisle. Now, that's the kind of leadership I'm talking about. Rand Paul played offense by attaching personhood, the ultimate pro-life principle in action, onto a bill that was expected to pass easily. By doing so, he would either force the Democrats to give him his vote on it or cause them to make total fools out of themselves, as Reid does in this article. Like when Reid expresses incredulity that we could actually debate something as trite and insignificant in the U.S. Senate as when life begins. Given that life is one of the inalienable rights to life posited in our founding document, is there anything more important for our elected officials to be debating? I've put that part of the Huffington Post story and a few other lines in bold in the book for a reason, because they're examples of how Rand Paul, by playing offense, grabbed the moral high ground and was making the left accept our premise. Note the article doesn't refer to Rand's pro-life bill as anti-reproductive freedom, but as personhood. If they're going to report accurately on the bill, even the liberal Huffington Post has to use that term because personhood isn't having an argument with anti-lifers about how many kids we're going to permit them to kill, or how we'll let them kill them, or when we'll let them kill them, after they jump through a few hoops. Maybe then they can kill the baby. No, personhood is a debate about whether or not all life is precious and sacred. Personhood is the high ground. Furthermore, Rand Paul got the Democrat Senate Majority Leader to call Debating When Life Begins ridiculous and outlandish. Remember the 2008 presidential forum hosted at Saddleback Church when Rick Warren asked Barack Obama, "At what point does an unborn baby deserve human rights?" Remember Obama's flippant, "That's above my pay grade" response? Remember that was one of the few times you actually thought John McCain could win the election? That's because it was about the only time in the entire campaign that McCain grabbed the moral high ground and played offense, with a considerable assist from Warren's question, of course. Rand Paul managed to do something here few pro-life politicians have successfully been able to do for years: get the left off script and reacting to our argument. Reid is so frustrated with what Rand Paul did here, he insisted Republicans deal with him on their side of the aisle. If a committed pro-life Republican wanted to challenge Reid in his next election, they've got one whale of a soundbite to use against him now. The Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate, and everywhere else for that matter, should be constantly emulating what Rand Paul did here. The real question is how come Rand Paul in his second year in the U.S. Senate managed to get under Reid's skin in a way most of the Republicans who have been up there for eons haven't. Rand did something else by doing this as well. He boosted team morale. Now maybe it's a coincidence that Rand did this just 2 weeks after his endorsement of establishment proxy Mitt Romney drew the ire of many of his own supporters. But before we become too cynical, we should note the first bill Rand Paul ever sponsored as a U.S. Senator was a personhood bill. So while the timing may not be a coincidence, it's clear this is a principle that Rand cares deeply about. By playing offense with his principles, Rand changed the conversation from his lackluster endorsement to his bold leadership. He didn't undo all the damage he did to his base with this one gesture, but he took a giant first step towards doing so. Not to be outdone, Senator Ted Cruz has produced a highlight reel of similar moments early in his first term as a U.S. Senator. As a result, there is more excitement for Cruz among the grassroots than any Republican politician I can remember. And it's because he's seen as someone they can play offense with, whether it's a confirmation hearing, taking the fight to the left, or confronting Republicrats like John McCain on the floor of the U.S. Senate. As one mainstream media reporter told me off the record, quote, "Cruz is a different animal. You ask a lot of these other Republicans a question that requires an answer other than their talking points, and they stall or look to change the subject. But Cruz comes right after the question, turns it around on the questioner if he doesn't like it, and then always has an answer ready to go if he does." This is why I told National Review last year that Cruz isn't just a potential GOP 2016 presidential candidate. He's a potential force of nature. I'm too young to remember the ascendancy of Reagan, but in my lifetime, nobody has better articulated the principles of the conservative grassroots on a national level than Cruz. Throw in his family's powerful testimony as first-generation immigrants escaping tyranny, and he has the total package it takes to take on the ruling class. Leadership always wins, and people love a winner. Remember the mantra of the Republicrats: surrender now before it's too late. The GOP and sadly many conservatives are punch drunk, believing on one hand the majority of the country is with us, while at the same time walking around with the proverbial sword of Damocles dangling over our heads. Conservatives long for a day when America suddenly wakes up and returns to our constitutional Republican roots. But it's hard to do that when conservatives rarely attempt to advance their principles beyond their own enclaves and subcultures. Wacko birds like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Mike Lee of Utah aren't waiting until there's a Republican majority to push their moral convictions, or waiting for any other harmonic convergence which never occurs that the Republicans say we must have before we actually play offense with our principles. They're acting instead as someone that believes they're accountable to conscience, convictions, and constituents, not the corrupt process or some phony definition of Senate collegiality. During parts of campaign 2012, I was a frequent guest on MSNBC, and just about every time I announced I was going on, a fellow conservative would either email or tweet me that I should never go on that channel because of its leftist leanings. Yet on MSNBC, I've had the opportunity to take some of the most hard-right positions you'll ever see anywhere on national television, and I've even shared my Christian testimony. In fact, I once received the following email from Jonathan Collegio, who is the communications director for Karl Rove's American Crossroads. He wrote, quote, "I've been meaning to reach out for a while, not regarding the Conservatives versus Rhodes sideshow, because I wanted to thank you for giving some of the best, most fearless, and most succinct remarks on the gospel I've heard on TV ever. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember it was on MSNBC, and I suddenly looked up from my desk and saw you basically preaching the good news about Jesus. as the host and the other guests just kind of stood there stunned. It was likely the most gospel-centered message ever given on MSNBC, and I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated it. God has blessed you with great communication skills, and it encouraged me to see you be so boldly talking about Jesus, especially in the face of an audience like that. Last I checked, if you want to govern, you have to win a majority of the hearts and minds of the voters. To win a majority of those hearts and minds at some point means you are going to have to venture into foreign territory with the courage to engage them. That's how we generate converts. St. Paul changed entire cultures with nothing more than the Word of God and a tent-making kit, and he did so under the constant threat of death. The only threat we're under is being mocked or rejected. Sure, after I go on MSNBC, I often get called every nasty name in the book by the tolerance mob. But I've also received several emails from folks who said that because of my willingness to be honest in my analysis and holding Republicans to the same standard as Democrats, and how respectful I was when making my arguments, they're willing to consider what I'm saying, when previously they just dismissed it out of hand. I even had a producer at MSNBC tell me once, I used to think people like you were crazy, and I'm still not sure I agree with anything you say, but you actually have facts and figures to back up why you believe what you believe. So at the very least, I've come around to understanding how someone could think the way that you do. When Bobby Bowden took over as football coach at Florida State, he scheduled road games at places like Nebraska and Michigan to get his team featured on national television. The Seminoles weren't the college football power back then. They eventually became. So Bowden had to accept one-game contracts with no return game in Tallahassee. Still, Bowden decided the exposure for the Florida State brand was worth the risk. That plan eventually paid off. The Seminoles increased exposure to their brand and were able to recruit better players as a result. Those players eventually helped them win some of those road games, and Florida State eventually set a record by finishing in the top 5 of the final AP college football poll, a record 14 consecutive seasons. Bowden eventually surpassed his legendary idol Bear Bryant in all-time wins as well. We have the truth and tradition on our side, meaning that human history proves our principles are true. Every society that has embraced the ideology of the left has been cursed, and every society that has embraced our ideology has been blessed. It's no coincidence that the more we lurch to the left, the worse off the average American becomes. We should be as confident as Breitbart and Bowden in taking our beliefs and brand out into the culture at large and playing offense with them. It's not only to score points and reach the unconverted, but it also keeps up the morale of our own troops and rallies our base. In the 2010 midterm elections, we had a great goal line stand that stopped the left from shoving Obamacare and cap and tax down our throats, which would have been the game-clinching touchdowns for the progressives. However, any knowledgeable football fan knows that when your offense gets the ball back after a goal line stand, you're on your own 1-yard line with 99 yards to go for you to score a touchdown. Fellow Patriot, I believe that is an accurate picture of where we currently stand. We need to start playing offense and putting the leftists on the defensive. Obviously, 99-yard touchdown plays are rare, but at the very least, we need leaders and arguments that give us some first downs so we can improve our field position. First downs build momentum and get your crowd back in the game. String together enough first downs, and before you know it, you're in position to score a touchdown. And we need touchdowns, not settling for field goals. We are facing, at best, a long generational grind to restore the republic. And the longer we take to go on offense, the longer it will take to preserve freedom and liberty for our children and grandchildren. Take too long, and we'll be out of time altogether.
And that was Chapter 11 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that socialism is antisocial.